Pope Francis has appointed a new Camerlengo. You might be asking what that is. A Camerlengo, or Chamberlain, or Chamber Officer, is an office that has existed for centuries in the Vatican. In 1988, John Paul II issued Pastor Bonus, the apostolic constitution that reformed the office of the Camerlengo, making a key requirement for the office membership in the College of Cardinals. During interregnum, that is when the See of Peter is vacant due to the death or, resignation of the Pope, the Camerlengo would become the acting administrator of the Vatican. The Camerlengo is responsible for the formal determination of the death of the reigning Pope. Upon the death of a Pope, the fisherman's ring is removed from his finger and cut with shears in the presence of the cardinals. That act symbolizes the end of that Pope's authority and prevents the use of the ring for forging papal documents. That's a pretty important thing to do, all things considered. The Camerlengo then notifies the appropriate officers of the Roman Curia and the Dean of the College of Cardinals of the death of the Pope. He participates in the preparations for the conclave and the Pope's funeral. He protects the last will of the Pope until it is handed to the College of Cardinals at their first meeting. Until a successor Pope can be elected, the Camerlengo serves as Vatican City's acting sovereign. Until 1996, he would be the acting sovereign of the Catholic Church as a whole, but that was changed with the release of Universi Dominici Gregis. His job is to make sure the various institutions of the Vatican continue to run in the absence of the Pope. Pope Francis appointed Cardinal Kevin Farrell to be that new Camerlengo. Farrell was Cardinal McCarrick's former roommate. I'm not even joking about that. For at least 6 years, these two men lived together, including during one of the periods that seminarians allege abuse happened at the hands of Cardinal McCarrick. If the name Kevin Farrell isn't ringing any bells for you, here's a reminder of who he was. You'll remember him almost immediately.
The only thing I can tell you about McCarrick is I was shocked, overwhelmed. I never heard any of this before. When the 6 years I was there with him, I didn't know Cardinal McCarrick prior to his coming to Washington, D.C. I was a priest of Washington, D.C. I worked in the Chancery in Washington, and never, no indication, none whatsoever. Nobody ever talked to me about that.
Yeah, Cardinal Farrell is that guy. Cardinal authenticity. Farrell has a long history of truly bad decision-making that all point to his being a member of the Lavender Mafia. He was a former member of the Legionaries of Christ, that religious order that the media, for some reason, continues to describe as conservative when they recount the continuing stream of sexual misconduct and scandals that the members of that order always seem to find themselves in. In the past decade, numerous stories have emerged that the priests in that order have had mistresses and fathered children, as well as engaged in the kind of behavior that the members of the Rainbow Coalition think is normal. If that's not enough, Farrell was a close collaborator with Father Marcel, the founder of the Legionaries of Christ. Between 2006 and 2014, accusations against Marcel came to light detailing decades of sexual abuse of seminarians, some as young as 12. And by decades, I mean accusations going back as far as 1941, when Maciel founded the order in Mexico. For decades, the Vatican dismissed accusations by seminarians that he had abused them sexually. And that's because Maciel, everyone thought, was a living saint. And that begs a lot of questions. I mean, if accusations are coming consistently about someone, you'd think the Vatican would have investigated the situation at some point. Or they might have bothered to investigate the other consistent complaints made to the Vatican, that the Legionaries of Christ were run like a personal cult to Maciel. They had rules forbidding any criticism of their founder or questioning his motives. The Legionaries of Christ were part of that post-council springtime of evangelization that we continue to hear so much about but see so few positive fruits. Maciel enjoyed the support of John Paul II and was spared official censure for years, despite the undeniable proof of Maciel's crimes. In 2006, after John Paul II's death, a Vatican investigation found that the accusations against Maciel had in fact been true. Pope Benedict XVI ordered Maciel to retire to a life of prayer and penitence. Sound familiar? Why wasn't he turned over to Mexican authorities or locked in a dungeon is a Good question. He died in 2008, and wouldn't you know it, Vatican investigators then discovered that he had fathered several children with at least 2 women, visited them regularly, and provided them financial support. That same investigation found that he was a recreational narcotics user. With all that having been discovered, you'd think that the Vatican might suppress the order. Maybe if they had been traditionalist adhering to the Latin Mass and the faithful, timeless teachings of the Church, they might have been. But instead, the Vatican appointed a new commissioner to oversee the order. The Legionaries of Christ operate to this day with that oversight. This is the religious order Cardinal Farrell had been a member of. But it gets better. Cardinal Farrell was ordained by Cardinal McCarrick and later served as his auxiliary bishop in D.C. That was when they were roommates. In fact, they have a long history together, to the point that Farrell was a direct recipient of numerous benefits conferred on him by McCarrick's influence. Given his close proximity to the former cardinal, his claim of not knowing about his proclivities is rather laughable. But it's long been rumored that the Vatican has had dossiers on both McCarrick and Farrell, as in both of their exploits were well known to the current guys running the show in Rome. They knew about his connections to Maciel. They knew about his use of diocesan funds to buy a mansion for his residence in Dallas in a rather notorious Skittles neighborhood when he was bishop. They knew about the stories of his indiscretions that followed him in his whole career. And he still got this promotion. Nothing quite like failing upwards. 1 Peter 5 had a story on this from last September that got little to no traction, but has suddenly become very relevant. So this comes from 1 Peter 5 by Steve Skojic, the proprietor of that fine website. Headline: A new bomb in the Vatican. Italian Daily teases CDF dossier on Cardinal Kevin Farrell. From September 5th, 2018. I'm going to jump here to this part here. Claims of new information from Francesca Fagnani Il Fatto Quotidiano, apologies to any Italians who might be offended at my American pronunciation, may bring to light to Farrell's involvement in what was rapidly becoming the most high-profile abuse case in the Catholic Church. The Italian report, translated by Giuseppe Pellegrino for 1 Peter 5, says there is a violent and unprecedented civil war in the Church that now involves even the Pope. Following Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano's bombshell testimony about the cover-ups of the abuse of Cardinal Theodore McCarrick that included Pope Francis, Fagnani says that soon another bomb could break out. Unless I missed something as an aside, that bomb never exploded. Probably that dossier was quashed. But let's keep going. According to reliable sources close to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, says Fagnani, there may be a similar dossier on Cardinal Kevin Joseph Farrell. Farrell was specifically nominated as auxiliary bishop of Washington, writes Fagnani, because Cardinal Theodore McCarrick wanted him as his assistant, and these two men became part of Pope Francis's magic circle. Farrell and McCarrick also lived together for years, sharing the same apartment. How could Farrell possibly not know all about McCarrick's sexual behaviors? Fagnani then asked the obvious question without providing a specific answer. What is contained in this new dossier on Farrell? The Pope and the Secretariat of State know about every single new thread of every investigation that is opened by the tribunal of the CDF, so how could they possibly not know about this? Did Farrell's nomination to such a high post precede or follow the opening of this investigation? The historian Roberto de Mattei, among the most knowledgeable of Vatican experts, known for his traditionalist positions, adds this little comment, quote, the link between the two prelates, McCarrick and Farrell, was known but never clarified. There may be something else behind the silence of Pope Francis and Cardinal Parolin, end quote. What exactly might that something be? Quote, I know Vigano personally. He is an honest and prudent man. I am certain that everything he says is true. He probably knows more. We know that the famous report of the 3 cardinals, from Herranz, Tomko, de Gorgi in 2012, exists on the moral and other corruption within the Roman Curia, which was given to Ratzinger prior to his resignation. This report has been seen by Francis and select number of others. What would happen if it was published? End quote. This report of the 3 cardinals, said to comprise 300 pages, was delivered to Pope Benedict XVI in December 2012 and kept under pontifical secret. It was this document that some believe influenced the former pope to abdicate his position. According to a report published on Rorate Celi in February 2013, quote, for the largest Italian daily, La Repubblica, the key part of the 300-page cardinalitarial report, the Relatio, on the Vatican leaks, in 2 red hardbound tomes, was the identification of a hugely powerful and highly influential Skittles underground in the Curia and in the Universal Church. This was the same report mentioned by Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano in a follow-up interview last week after the release of his testimony. I spoke because now more than ever, corruption has spread to the highest levels of the hierarchy of the church. I asked the journalists, why are they not asking what happened to the cache of documents that, as we all saw, were delivered at Castel Gandolfo to Pope Francis from Pope Benedict? What was that all useless? It would have been enough to read my report in the transcript that was made of my deposition before the three cardinals charged with the investigation of the VatiLeaks case, Julian Herranz, Josef Tomko, and Salvatore De Gorgi, in order to begin some cleaning up of the curia. If indeed a dossier similar to that of McCarrick exists on Cardinal Farrell, another of the Pope's hand-picked men, it will truly be explosive. Even more stunning would be the revelation of this long-buried report uncovering the work of the so-called Lavender Mafia within the Church. If you want to read the rest of that yourself, you can find a link to that on the Sources blog. In other words, days after letting the news leak that McCarrick was going to get laicized, the Pope appoints Ted McCarrick Jr. to a key post in the election of the next Pope. Doesn't that fill your heart with joy? I know it fills my heart with joy. What are the chances that Farrell received his promotion as part of a deal made with McCarrick not to let out all the dark secrets the current crowd running the Vatican have? Think about it for a moment. What does McCarrick have to lose? He's in a position to destroy literally everyone in power right now. He knows where the bodies are buried. Maybe literally. Remember how he bragged about lobbying at the conclave for the election of Pope Francis? If not, I'll help you out here.
About maybe just before we went into the general conversations when everybody can talk, a very interesting and influential Italian gentleman came to ask if he'd come to see me. So I said, sure, and he came to see me at the seminary, the American college where I was staying. We sat down. This is a very brilliant man, very influential man in Rome, and we talked about a number of things. He had a favor to ask me for back here in the United States. But then he said, what about Bergoglio? And I was surprised at the question. I said, what about him? He said, does he have a chance? I said, I don't think so, because no one's mentioned his name. He hasn't been into his mind. I don't think it's on anybody's mind to vote for him. He said, he could do it, you know. I said, what could he do? He said, he could reform the church. We gave him 5 years, he could put us back on target. He's 76. They said, yeah, 5 years. If you had 5 years, the Lord working through Bergoglio in 5 years could make the church over again.
If that's true, then it might canonically invalidate the election of Pope Francis, though I would caution you to take the word of a sexual abuser at face value, especially if he's got a gigantic ego like McCarrick, who has a sort of a messianic complex. He had a lot of power, and he still does, in spite of everything. If the Vatican wanted to send a positive message of real reform, then no one associated with McCarrick would have received that promotion. But instead, we get the news that yet another McCarrick acolyte with a familiar name has been promoted. Why? And why do we keep hearing the same dozen or so names getting promotions in the Vatican? Why is it always Tobin, Supich, Maradiaga, Farrell, and others? There are literally hundreds of cardinals and thousands of bishops to choose from, but the same names are repeated in the news from the Vatican. Ponder that. And remember, thinking that there is a lavender mafia in control of the Vatican right now is a conspiracy theory. Just ignore those same dozen or so names that keep coming up in the news. Don't notice the obvious trends, whatever you do, or you might become some kind of schismatic. Or so the establishment Catholic media keeps telling us. Thank you for listening and for your support. If you want to support my work, there are options in the description of this video. I ask that people continue to pray and do acts of penance for the liberation and exaltation of the Church. I'm Anthony Stein. Viva Cristo Rey.